A diverse team of superheroes fighting for equality in a world that hates and fears their inclusion, turned away by every television executive on the planet until one woman with the power of foresight risked her future in the fight for the hearts and minds of allies around the world. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of X-Men, the animated series. We have previously covered the history of X-Men, the animated series, back in April of 2018. We're revisiting it here to tell a more comprehensive story that includes a significant chapter of the story that was not only unexpected at the time, but not even in development. X-Men, the animated series, is an animated series that ran 76 episodes over 5 seasons from October of 1992 through September of 1997. Technically, it wasn't the first time a cartoon was called X-Men, nor the first time the characters were featured in a cartoon, but it was the version that finally broke them out of comics into mainstream public awareness. The X-Men began as a group of 5 teenage superheroes first published by Marvel Comics in 1963. Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Iceman, Beast, and Angel were all students at Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, where they got a high school education and learned how to properly, safely use their powers in the fight against evil mutants. According to Professor Xavier, the X in X-Men comes from the extra genetic powers they possess, like laser eyes, making ice, or having wings. Their powers are mutations, making each of them mutants, a simple origin story which co-creator Stan Lee turned to out of exhaustion. See, over the previous 2 years, Lee and co-creator Jack Kirby laid the foundation of the Marvel Universe with dozens of new superheroes and supervillains, with powers drawn from accidents that involved Earth radiation and space radiation, mad scientists, happy scientists, people who messed around with magic, people who shared bodies with gods. Lee just wanted something simple, obvious, and relatable. Some people are just born that way. Thank you to 80stees.com for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description below and use code TOYGALAXY to get 30% off your order today. What's the first thing that pops into your head when I say the 1980s or the 1990s? Don't think about it, just say it. 1, 2, 3, Rubik's Cube. Yes, they have that, or they had that, or they will have that. 80stees.com is constantly refreshing their inventory with officially licensed t-shirts featuring characters, quotes, and logos from cartoons, comics, TV shows, movies, wrestling, and music from the 1970s through the 2000s. So while I can't guarantee that everything you can think of will be in stock, I can guarantee that you'll always be surprised by the range of their selection. 80stees.com has something for everyone. Your favorite heroes like Batman, Spider-Man, Mega Man, Deadpool, and Wolverine, Voltron, both Lion and Vehicle, Star Wars, Stargate, old and older Battlestar Galactica, Motley Crue, Biz Markie, Pink Floyd, and Jimi Hendrix. Find the shirt that's right for you, the one that speaks to your interests, and lets the world know that there's no bigger fan of scratch and sniff stickers, spam, or Kellogg's Fruit Loops than you, and you can prove it because you're wearing the shirt. Click the link below and use code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order today. Again, that's code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order. And thanks again to 80stees.com. What may have begun as another comic book about teenage costume superheroes eventually borrowed general themes from the civil rights movement. Mutants were persecuted for simply existing, for being inherently different and thereby dangerous to normal people. Professor X advocated for peaceful coexistence on one side, while Magneto advocated for the subjugation of the human race on the other. Not exactly Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X.
Hurry! There he is!
Just 3 years after their debut in comics, the X-Men made their first television appearance in a Grant Ray Lawrence-produced episode of Marvel Superheroes featuring the Submariner. The story kicked off in the episode Doomsday that should have seen Dr. Doom squaring off against the Fantastic Four, but they were already contractually obligated to Hanna-Barbera's Fantastic Four cartoon, so the X-Men were subbed in. Over the next 6 years, sales on X-Men were so poor that Marvel either had to drastically shake things up or cancel the book. To that end, Giant Size X-Men #1 in May of 1975 introduced a new team of X-Men that was intentionally designed to represent a diverse range of characters from around the world. The days of X-Men comics being exclusively about high school kids were long over. Cyclops carried over from the original team, but older, wiser, more mature. He was joined by Storm from Kenya, Nightcrawler from Germany, Native American Thunderbird, Sunfire from Japan, Colossus from Russia, Banshee from Ireland, and Wolverine from America's Hat. The roster continued to evolve over the next decade, with Cyclops, Storm, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and Colossus forming the core, while other characters came and went. Iceman, who was part of the original roster, made a few cameos in the comics, but more importantly became a TV star as one of Spider-Man's amazing friends. For 24 episodes over 3 seasons from 1981 to 1983, Spider-Man and his amazing friends brought Marvel's mutants and the X-Men to Saturday mornings in an unprecedented capacity. Both Firestar and Iceman were featured alongside one of the most popular and most recognizable Marvel characters in history. The X-Men as a team made appearances in 1982's A Firestar is Born and 1983's The X-Men Adventure, each time testing the waters of fan response to see if they were ready for an X-Men television series. If people liked Firestar and Iceman, were they ready for Storm and Wolverine? According to executives at Marvel Productions and television networks around the dials, the answer was no. But in 1984, the X-Men got a new ally ready and willing to fight for them. No, not Professor Xavier or Magneto. New president and CEO of Marvel Productions, Margaret Loesch. Loesch began her television career in 1971, working at ABC at age 25. Just 4 years later, in 1979, she was the vice president of children's programming at Hanna-Barbera Productions, and shortly after that, executive vice president. When she moved to Marvel Productions in 1984, she already had dozens of credits, including Super Friends, The Smurfs, Pac-Man, The New Scooby and Scrappy-Doo Show, Challenge of the GoBots, and Shirt Tales. The Reagan administration's deregulation of television advertising kicked off a golden age of selling toys to kids through 22-minute cartoons. Loesch helped bring even more classic cartoons to life with G.I. Joe, Transformers, Dungeons & Dragons, Super Sunday, sometimes called Super Saturday, My Little Pony and Humanoids, Defenders of the Earth, Gem, The Little Clowns of Happy Town. No, it's not on the list, and it never will be. She partnered with Jim Henson Productions for one of the most successful cartoons of all time, Muppet Babies, a show so popular that it essentially carried Marvel Productions through their purchase and reincorporation with Marvel Comics as Marvel Entertainment Group by New World Pictures in 1986 and the choppy financial waters that followed. Loesch fostered a working partnership with Stan Lee, who was a tireless champion of Marvel's characters and their viability as mainstream entertainment brands, in particular the untapped potential of the uncanny X-Men. In 1988, Marvel Entertainment launched the Marvel Action Universe that featured 2 new cartoons based on toy lines, Dino Riders from Tyco, and a highly sanitized version of the 1987 film RoboCop from Kenner. The third programming slot was a platoon of reruns from 1981's Spider-Man and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Reruns kept the budget in check, but weren't the ideal method for expanding the Marvel brand on television and at retail, which is what Margaret Loesch really wanted to do. Loesch wanted to get the ball rolling on a pilot for a new X-Men series, but at the time Marvel Entertainment wasn't exactly cash rich. In 1989, they were purchased from New World Pictures by Andrews Group, an investment company owned by Ron Perlman, specifically because New World Pictures wasn't exactly cash rich either. In the final stretch of its 13-episode order, Loesch borrowed some money from RoboCop. She reallocated 1 episode's worth of cash to fund a single pilot episode of X-Men, something Marvel Entertainment could test on the Marvel Action Universe so viewers could let Marvel know if they were finally ready for a full dose of the X-Men. They partnered with Toei Animation as they had previously on G.I. Joe and Transformers. In 22 minutes, the single episode titled Pride of the X-Men did its best to establish the X-Men, their powers, Magneto, the evil mutants and their powers, and the fear and hatred that humans felt toward all of them. Pride of the X-Men first aired in September of 1989 and then randomly as part of the Marvel Action Universe until the Marvel Action Universe itself ended. Despite Loesch and Lee's dreams of a world filled with X-Men cartoons, toys, and movies, these X-Men weren't picked up for a series. For several reasons. 1, it wasn't remotely like the soap opera that was happening in the comics. 2, there were no toys on the shelves. 3, Marvel's recent purchase by Ron Perlman left Marvel Entertainment Group with very little room to move in their budget. Other than Muppet Babies, nearly every other project was in limbo. If the X-Men were going to succeed on television in the 90s, they were going to need a 90s approach. Margaret Loesch resigned from Marvel Entertainment Group in 1990 to take a similar position at Fox. Fox president Jamie Kellner recruited her specifically to build Fox's Saturday morning programming to compete in the next generation of children's television. Loesch took the job because she saw it as a unique challenge. As she put it in a 1991 article, quote, "I didn't come over here for money because I'm not making any more money. I was romanced by the thought that this was the underdog company and this would be a real adventure." Furthermore, she wanted to craft a roster of shows where the shows themselves were the selling point, independent of whatever products the associated toy companies were trying to sell that year. From the same article, quote, "It helps pay the overhead, but it is very hard and very constrictive creatively. I didn't want to put up any roadblocks for our creative people. I wanted to take them away." One of the first things Loesch did at Fox was convince President Kellner to take a chance on a new X-Men cartoon, despite Fox's concern that the X-Men were too dark and too adult. It was a huge risk for her personally and professionally, considering the performance of the X-Men on television historically. Loesch understood that if it didn't work, she would likely be fired. But a lot had changed in the comics and on toy shelves in the 2 years since Pride of the X-Men aired. The X-Men had become one of the most popular, best-selling comics in the industry, partially thanks to the rise of superstar artist Jim Lee. In fact, the cross-title reorganization of the X-Men books in 1991 was led by Lee's X-Men #1, which at the time was the best-selling comic book of all time. It sold over 8 million copies and confirmed that the X-Men were a pop culture phenomenon, at least as far as the comics were concerned. And not for nothing, but Marvel Comics was invested in the toy business through a recent merger with Toy Biz. X-Men action figures sold like very popular X-Men themed hotcakes. The only piece missing from the X-Men portfolio was a cartoon. Loesch ordered a full season of 13 episodes from Saban Entertainment. However, Saban wasn't set up to properly produce a full animated series in-house, so they partnered with Graz Entertainment. Saban brought in budget-friendly Korean animation studio and longtime Marvel Productions collaborator ACOM to produce the actual animation. Industry veterans Eric Lewald and Mark Edens were hired as story editor and head writer respectively. Despite neither of them having any prior knowledge of the X-Men, they both loved heroic storytelling. Marvel Comics writer Bob Harris was a consultant. Will Mineo, Larry Houston, and Rick Hoberg, who worked on Pride of the X-Men, who were very knowledgeable about the X-Men, were brought back in to help build the new 90s X-Men. Inspiration from everything from costumes to storylines was pulled directly from the comics, including Wolverine's recent transition back to his original blue and yellow tiger-striped uniform, and the inclusion of hot new characters like Gambit, designed by Jim Lee, and Jubilee, designed by Mark Silvestri. Like the comics, X-Men the Animated Series leaned into the soap operatic nature of the stories with interpersonal drama and serialized storytelling, plots that built over time. The writers wagered that viewers who liked the X-Men comics understood that while individual episodes could stand on their own, connected episodes offered greater payoffs. A simple previously on X-Men recap kicked off every episode just in case.
Hey, true believers, I'm Stan Lee, and I want to tell you about the most fantastic sweepstakes ever. How would you like to work with me for a day as editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics? Just enter the Kmart and Marvel Comics Watch and Win sweepstakes this May and June. Get your Watch and Win scratch-off game card at participating Kmart restaurants and win one of 18 million discounts on Kmart food and drinks, plus 2,500 other prizes. Just watch the Marvel Action Hour and answer my questions. Details at participating Kmart restaurants.
The theme song was written by Ron Wasserman and composed by Saban and Shuki Levy. Technically, the song was written by Wasserman working by himself at his keyboard, figuring out melodies and piecing things together. Legally, Wasserman understood that as an employee of Saban Entertainment, Saban and Levy would always get credit for the things he wrote for them. A quote attributed to Wasserman in a 2022 article on Popverse states, quote, "Working at Saban was like getting paid to go to college. Saban and Shuki took full ownership, rights, and revenue for what all their composers wrote. They were upfront about the deal from the beginning. 3 of my 6 years there, I wrote hundreds of things for them. I left in 1995 and have always been properly credited on all projects since then." Casting took a few attempts to get right. Voice acting was handled by a Canadian studio because it was cheaper, but without direct supervision of the process, the first batch of voice characterization came back a bit over the top. In a 2017 article on Hollywood Reporter, story editor Eric Lewald described the first casting session as, quote, "awful. It was just worthless. It was like Scooby-Doo X-Men. They didn't get it, so we had to send a bunch of people up and completely redo it from scratch." But once it was resolved, they had a final cast with Norm Spencer as Cyclops, Cal Dodd as Wolverine, Lenore Zann as Rogue, Iona Morris as Storm, George Buza as Beast, Chris Potter as Gambit, Allison Court as Jubilee, Catherine Disher as Jean Grey, and watching over them all was Cedric Smith as Professor X. The core roster was a bold demonstration of how X-Men broke with established conventions about what a cartoon for kids could and could not do. Most cartoons for boys would have drawn the line at a single girl on the team. X-Men frequently featured 4 or more. And when it came to subject matter, the 2-episode premiere Night of the Sentinels dove right in with giant killer robots hunting mutants, including children, on behalf of a government registration act. One of the X-Men, the shapeshifter named Morph, is killed. Night of the Sentinels Part 1 was originally scheduled to premiere Saturday, October 3rd, but ACOM had not provided any finished episodes yet. Fox announced a 1-week delay and covered their butts by suggesting that they understood the fans' disappointment, but it was important that they air Ghostwriter, a collaboration with PBS sponsored by Nike to help promote literacy. The reality was that the premiere was delayed to give ACOM more time to finish, the animation. It was subsequently delayed 2 more times through October, leaving fans wondering if the show would ever air. When the first batch of animation samples finally arrived from ACOM, they were, to put it lightly, a mess, full of hundreds of errors that ranged from characters casting no shadows, to half-assed visual effects, and Gambit's eyes just straight up being the wrong color. ACOM refused to fix the errors in the amount of time they were given, and Loesch had no choice but to let the episode go to air, flaws and all. Night of the Sentinels Part 1 finally aired Saturday, October 31st. When ACOM informed Fox that the second episode would not be done on time, Fox threatened to withhold payment for the work they had done and cancel the rest of the contract. The crisis was averted when the footage arrived, incomplete, but in hand on time as threatened. Fox had 1 day to edit episode 2 before broadcast. A third episode squeaked out in November, but the rest of the series was pushed back to January to give ACOM more time to recognize what a fine line they were walking. The first 2 episodes were fixed, re-edited, and re-premiered January 9th, 1993, followed by the remaining 11 Season 1 episodes in order through March. It wasn't just Margaret Loesch's job on the line. Each episode of X-Men cost roughly $400,000, but Loesch and the rest of the crew were confident that if they could just get the show to air, the audience would find it, and they would love it. And they did. Fox affiliates around the country were overwhelmed with calls. Fox Kids received mountains of fan mail. X-Men got a full 65-episode order. The fight to get it to air was over. The fight to maintain the quality had just begun. Heading into Season 2, Saban cut the payout for a script by $500 because he could. X-Men was a hit, and he knew that writers would be lined up to put their name on an episode. If anyone quit, there would be dozens of writers ready to replace them. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right, but it did save $500 per episode. As ratings climbed, the writers and producers had to repeatedly risk their jobs to insist that toy manufacturers and other license holders be prevented from influencing the show in any way. As Eric Lewald told The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "There was incredible pressure to change it around and make it younger, sillier, or give them a pet dog, to dumb it down or make it younger." Weekly episodes of X-Men were a core building block for Fox Kids alongside Batman the Animated Series and Animaniacs. As Will Mineo put it in the same interview in Hollywood Reporter, quote, "Our show demonstrated that the Marvel Universe as a whole had commercial value far beyond what anybody estimated. X-Men was getting primetime numbers on Saturday morning." X-Men fulfilled its 65-episode order and aired a proper finale in November of 1995, a 4-part series called Beyond Good and Evil that saw the X-Men fighting alongside Cable and Bishop against Apocalypse across time and space. But in a surprise to everyone, Fox ordered 11 more episodes. Unfortunately, Marvel was facing bankruptcy due to several misguided investments and publishing strategies, not the least of which was indulging in a speculator market driven by the popularity of multiple variant covers on popular books they restarted at #1, like the X-Men. Saban stepped up to fund the 11 episodes, but that meant the production costs had to be slashed. Saban found an even cheaper animation studio that worked within the budget despite the obvious reduction in quality. A final finale aired September 20th, 1997. Graduation Day ended the acclaimed series with an assassination attempt on Professor Xavier's life. Hoping to save him, he's whisked away into space by the Shi'ar Empire, leaving Magneto and the X-Men on Earth to deal with the fallout. Magneto calling off his invasion of Earth out of respect for his only friend, Professor X. Today, X-Men the Animated Series is owned by the Walt Disney Company, who purchased Saban Entertainment in 2001 and Marvel Entertainment in 2009 and Fox in 2019. Disney, till all are one.
I am the darkness.
It was also in 2019 that Marvel Studios, already in production on What If, began to explore potential development options. Brad Winderbaum, X-Men fan and head of streaming television animation for Marvel Studios, suggested bringing back X-Men the Animated Series. Discussions were held with Larry Houston, producer and director of all 76 X-Men the Animated Series episodes, and other members of the 90s creative team, including Eric and Julia Lewald. The idea was not to do an X-Men series like X-Men the Animated Series, but to actually pick up where it left off in 1997. In 2020, Beau DeMayo, a writer on the live-action Moon Knight series on Disney+, was asked to pitch the revival series. In an interview with The Direct, DeMayo described the impact X-Men the Animated Series had on his own life, saying, quote, "I grew up with the show. I watched it. I was adopted. I think that's what kind of brought me to the show. My parents are white. My sister is from Korea. They were also adopted, and I was gay. I was growing up in the South. Everyone has a sad story, but like, X-Men was my way of kind of making sense of this weird family where no one resembled me, but yet we weren't blood, but we were supposed to be family." X-Men 97 was officially announced in November of 2021, the first X-Men film or television production since Disney's acquisition of both Marvel and Fox. Professor X's brief appearance in 2022's Doctor Strange in the multiverse of madness notwithstanding. As for that multiverse, technically X-Men 97 is not part of it, but technically it is, because the multiverse is, by definition, infinite, and while we may never actually see these specific X-Men in any other movie or TV series, they're out there somewhere. That said, it is still the same continuity as the other Fox Kids 90s animated series that followed after the success of X-Men, like Avengers, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Hulk. That's the beauty of the multiverse. You can have it all, and the more you have, the less any of it matters. The new series, officially titled X-Men 97, began airing on Disney Plus in March of 2024, with episodes following into May. Several members of the original cast returned to their roles from the 90s, including Cal Dodd as Wolverine, Lenore Zann as Rogue, George Buza as Beast, Allison Seeley-Smith as Storm, Adrian Huff as Nightcrawler, Christopher Britton as Mr. Sinister. Joined by newcomers Ray Chase as Cyclops, Jennifer Hale as Jean Grey, Holly Chow as Jubilee, J.P. Karliak as Morph, Isaac Robinson Smith as Bishop, Matthew Watterson as Magneto, Ross Marquand as Professor X, and my good friend AJ Locascio as Gambit. Can't have a revival of X-Men the Animated Series without the iconic theme song, or so said Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige. The first legal battle over the theme took place in 2019, shortly after Disney purchased Fox. Zoltan Crisco from Florida, USA, filed a lawsuit on behalf of the estate of composer George Vukan, who passed away in 2013. The lawsuit claimed that Marvel, Warner Music, Saban, Shuki Levy, Ron Wasserman, Disney Music, and Fox were all in violation of Vukan's copyright for the theme song to a television series called Linda, which aired 17 episodes in Hungary between 1984 and 1991. In 2020, Wasserman was removed from the case, which should have been the end of it, since he was the guy who would have been the one that copied the theme if it had been copied. Which it wasn't. But the case continued and was ultimately settled in 2021 with no publicly available resolution. Presumably, Marvel Studios took out their giant checkbook and wrote a giant check to end the matter once and for all. Marvel Studios took out their giant checkbook again after some legal back and forth with Saban. They wrote another giant check to acquire Saban's rights to the theme, originally written by Ron Wasserman. The rights to the song came with a few conditions. 1, it had to be re-recorded, something Marvel would have done anyway. And 2, however, whenever, and whoever re-recorded it, it still had to be credited to Saban and Shuki Levy. The theme was ultimately re-recorded by the Newton brothers. They breathed new life into the composition, making it sound like what they thought they remembered it sounding like in their memory, as opposed to how it actually sounded coming through the television 30 years later. Like the original series, X-Men 97 was a ratings bonanza, as far as we can tell with available data that is hard to track given the secrecy of streaming services. But all signs point to an overwhelmingly positive reception and more viewers for Disney Plus than the first season of What If. As of this video, you can watch every episode of X-Men the Animated Series and Season 1 of X-Men 97 on Disney Plus. X-Men the Animated Series blazed a trail for Fox Kids and Fox Adults. While it was on the surface a show for kids, it was in substance a show for everyone. As Loesch said in 1991, quote, "I'm a fan of cartoons and children's shows that didn't just talk down to kids, that had something for adults, and that's what we're trying to do." Loesch brought her experience and vision to the Young Network and helped it stand toe-to-toe with NBC, CBS, and ABC. She forced the other networks to respond with their own blocks of kids programming and to recommit to the quality of those shows or be left behind. She believed in the X-Men and their power to not only capture an audience, but to hold on to them with a message of hope, acceptance, and a willingness to fight for others in the face of great injustice. She knew that their power wasn't just in their laser eyes and unbreakable metal skeletons, but their ability to relate to us, and for us to relate to the X-Men. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. Please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy. Several different tiers to address your specific Secret Galaxy content needs. Check out the Secret Galaxy merch shop at secretgalaxy.shop. All merchandise is physically in stock and ready to ship. Links to all of this in the description down below. And let us know in the comments down below if you watched X-Men when it aired back in the 90s. I was excited about it in the lead up to it, but disappointed once it aired. I wholeheartedly preferred Pride of the X-Men over the 90s series, but so be it. That single episode was everything I wanted from an X-Men cartoon at the time and exactly the right time for me. That said, I enjoyed X-Men 97 and look forward to season 2 and 3. Maybe someday we can get Pride of the X-Men 90 as a prequel to X-Men the Animated Series.
Cut.